Joined by Congressman Thad McCotter, a man who has represented the great state of Michigan in the United States House of Representatives for a good long time now, has been a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. He also serves on the House Financial Services Committee, and as a result, we've got a lot of things of interest to talk with you about. Congressman McCotter, we're always delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Frank.
Let's start with sort of your reminiscence about Ronald Reagan. This is a sort of Reagan-themed show because it will be our last show before his 100th birthday. And I wonder what he meant to you personally, if you want to reflect on that, but more to the point, what you think he meant to the country and what his example means, if it's properly understood, for where we find ourselves today.
Well, I could only vote for Reagan in 84. I was too young to do it in 80. And the reason I voted for Ronald Reagan in 84 and the reason I became a Republican is because, as you know, Frank, in the Midwest, we're very practical people. Ronald Reagan himself came from Dixon, Illinois. And we saw what didn't work under Jimmy Carter, and we saw what did work under Ronald Reagan. And that type of common sense governance, I think, is completely lacking today. Yeah.
It goes beyond that, though, in the area that we're talking about most immediately on Secure Freedom Radio, of course, Congressman McCotter, and that is the kind of common sense approach that he took to national security and foreign policy, which really seems in such stark contrast to the kind of thinking or policy making that's going on at the moment. And I just wonder, the philosophy of peace through strength, I guess, was his marvelous commonsensical shorthand way of describing what his philosophy was. How would you say that helped shape the world at a critical moment during his presidency, and what's its relevance today?
Well, he also had the moral clarity to know that the Soviet Union was an evil empire, and he had courage to say it. And he knew that there was common sense that had to be applied to America's national security. That there were people out there who were not the friends of the United States, would do everything they can to injure our interests. I think that that's something that was painfully lacking in the Carter administration. I think it's something that we're lacking today. In fact, Reagan used to talk about how the Soviet Union could trust but verify because their avowed purpose from Lenin on was to undermine the United States, undermine the free world, have a socialist revolution. And they could do it in stages and take their time. They would lie, cheat, and steal. When Reagan would point that out, the intellectual elites and others would say, "Oh my, how crass!" And he'd say, "Hey, look, it's what they say. Don't blame me. Take it up with them." And I think that that's something we should apply. We should apply to the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, right about now. You know, sometimes people say things you don't like, but you can't wishfully put it off. Sometimes they mean it.
Congressman McCotter, I'm struck by that point. As just yesterday, as we're talking, the president had a State Department representative trot out the point that now the United States government recognizes the Muslim Brotherhood as a legitimate interlocutor, presumably as an entity that we would be happy to see come to power in Egypt. The clarity that you just talked about in terms of evil and the extent to which no good can come of its ascendancy in this part of the world, to say nothing of more broadly, would seem as stark a contrast with the Reagan approach as I could think of.
Well, I think you're right. And I think a lot of people, when you talk about Ronald Reagan, forget that even before the Shah went into exile, some geniuses in the Carter administration, State Department, and the embassies were having discussions with Khomeini and his supporters. They thought he'd be a liberalizing influence. They thought, no, he's not as bad as the detractors say. Khomeini deliberately put forward the agitprop that he was a liberalizing force, that he was not to be feared. You're seeing history repeat itself. The difference with the Carter people, at least they had the excuse they hadn't seen this before. This State Department, this administration has seen this before, and yet has learned nothing from it.
Right. This movie has a bad ending, and, and here we go through it all over again. Congressman McCotter, I know you have been very involved for a long time in both calling to account evil in this regime in Iran, as you say, the one that came to power that ruthlessly liquidated the Democrats and the communists that made up the United Front, that putatively was going to bring freedom to the people of Iran when that horrible old Shah left. You are now confronting, it seems, or we, I should say, are confronting a regime that is at the cusp of having nuclear weapons, that is seemingly about to pick up a major new ally in the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood coming to power, and that is clearly working to change the regimes throughout the region, including most recently in Lebanon and soon perhaps in Jordan and Yemen and who knows where all else, Tunisia maybe and others, into one that will more or less emulate the theocratic regime of Tehran, maybe of a Sunni stripe rather than Shia, but that's all beside the point, because they are first and foremost focused on hating and eliminating us. What would you say ought to be our policy now in light of this burgeoning problem towards the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Well, it remains what it was when President Obama did not push for the implosion of the Tehran regime. In fact, one of the great ironies, bitter ironies, is the way the administration has dealt with Egypt, our ally, as opposed to how they dealt with Iran, who was our avowed enemy. When you had people in the streets of the Green Revolution, I didn't see the president going to these lengths to make sure that Ahmadinejad was out of power.
Right. To the contrary, didn't even say anything about solidarity with the people of Iran necessarily translating into a change of regime. And I guess that really raises a question. Congressman Thad McCotter is our guest from Michigan. We're speaking to him from an airport on your way to or from your duty station. I know, Congressman, and we appreciate you finding some time for us. But one of the things that I guess really jumps out at you in terms of the consistency, if there is any, between how the president dealt with Iran and how he's now dealing with Egypt, and that is his position is solidarity with the Islamists in both cases. Is that unfair?
His practice seems to be the same as Carter, be it the communist Chinese, be it Medvedev and the Russians. He seems to be harder on our allies than on our enemies. He seems to think he can engage them, and he seems to think that he can shove our allies. And what we're going to find is we're going to have a whole lot fewer allies and a whole lot more enemies, and they're going to be emboldened. And what we're seeing, Frank, is we can cut through all the strategic talk we want. There's a fundamental, Americans are very bottom line people. Under the Obama administration, two things have happened. Ahmadinejad stayed, and Mubarak is going to leave. That is not good for American national security.
Yeah, I agree. And where we're going to find ourselves, I suspect, Congressman, is just to come back to Egypt for a minute, is having to reckon with decisions involving foreign aid to the Egyptian government. If, as it now seems likely, especially with the President of the United States strongly supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, if it seems likely the Muslim Brotherhood is shortly going to be in charge of this very strategic nation with an awful lot of armaments, how would you feel about a legislative initiative that says, no foreign aid is going to go to Egypt, not to the military, not to the civilian sector, if it is in fact made up of the Muslim Brotherhood or its proxies?
I think we have to, before we get the cart ahead of the horse as to what's going to happen, I still think we have to fight as best we can to get this administration to reverse course, to not consider the Muslim Brotherhood a responsible opposition party, and to work for a peaceful transition that both protects American interests and our allies' interests, and of course the interests of the Egyptian people. Listen to me, Frank. You know that if the Muslim Brotherhood does take over, what they're going to do is they're going to play nice until they can milk all the aid out of us that they can possibly get. And then they'll start to turn. What we don't want to happen is them getting in there in the first place. And I would like people who consider realists and Reaganites in foreign policy, be they on the neocon right or be they on the left, I want them to think about something. The Muslim Brotherhood co-opting this movement the way Khomeini's people co-opted the Iranian Revolution are going to hurt somebody more than anyone. It's going to be the Egyptian people. And so to have the vision and the clarity that Ronald Reagan had with the Soviet Union and others of America's and freedom's enemies, you have to apply it to Egypt now. And it would be nice if we thought that the popular movements, as legitimate grievances, would come to power and there'd be a peaceful transition. But you cannot have that as long as you have the Muslim Brotherhood lurking there, ready to take over, and certainly not with any help from the United States in recognition of it.
Yeah. Well, it's really with that idea in mind, Congressman Thad McCotter, and we'll have to let you go with this, that we might say now, if the Muslim Brotherhood comes to power, we're cutting you off. And maybe that can help be a disincentive to such a very dangerous idea. Congressman, thank you as always for joining us. Safe travels wherever you're headed, and we'll look forward to talking with you again soon. Hopefully